My name is Robert Dewar, and my project is an evaluation on juvenile detention. I will be presenting the scope of the problem, showing you some of the causes and the risk factors that put youth in danger, as well as presenting some possible solutions and programs, some of which have already begun to show progress. Before we begin, I should give warning that I love statistics and I'm somewhat of a math nerd. But even as someone who loves statistics and loves math, I have a hard time reading 5 pages worth of them, and sometimes statistics are hard to visualize. So while I'll still get into some statistics, first you should know why I chose to do a presentation over anything else, and that is so that I could show you photos like these, which help you understand the problem better than any statistics could. These photos show the conditions inside an all-girls juvenile detention facility. All three of the girls here are only 16 years old, and it gets worse. This photo was taken of an 11-year-old inside of a juvenile detention facility in Houston, Texas. I don't know what crimes these children committed, but I could tell you that this is not going to make society safer. Locking children in a cage and pretending that the children themselves are the problems is the real injustice, and it is obvious that rehabilitation is not the goal in a place like that. So how widespread is this problem? Well, this pie chart on the left shows us that there are close to 50,000 juveniles in detention at any given time. 2 out of 3 of those juveniles are considered long-term detainees, which means that their stay is for at least 1 month. Additionally, 1 out of 4 of juveniles in detention stay for at least 6 months, and close to 1 out of 10 of juveniles in detention stay for over a year. A lot of times, 1 out of every 5, detained juveniles have only committed minor offenses. Here's the pie chart enlarged, and I recommend you pause the video here if you're interested in just looking around at some of the numbers and exploring it for yourself. The chart shows what type of confinement juveniles are in, and then it dives farther into the crimes committed that got them into that confinement. Now this is a choropleth map that shows the rate of juvenile incarceration per state, with the higher intensity colors correlating to higher incarceration rates. So, where are the rates going? Is the problem getting worse or better? We can see here from this line graph that the arrest rates for juveniles has fallen considerably over the past 40 years. If you look around the middle of the graph to the late 90s, roughly 8,000 or so juveniles were being arrested per every 100,000, close to 1 out of every 12. You look at today and these rates have fallen all the way to around 1 out of every 70 juveniles. This decline is cool and all, and it's a great thing that we are putting more of an emphasis on fixing this problem, but it is still a serious problem and we cannot afford to ease up on efforts to address it. Now we know how many juveniles are being arrested and incarcerated. We also know how that compares historically. What about the crimes that are committed most often, and what, if any, risk factors there are that will identify those at risk and help us prevent juvenile crime in the future? So firstly, what are those most common crimes committed by juveniles? One thing before we dive into some of these crimes, I want to point out columns 3, 4, and 5. Almost every single crime across the board has gone down considerably from even so recent as 2011. The great thing about this table is that it shows that consistent decline in juvenile crime over the past 10 years. Something else important that we can learn from this table is that most of these crimes are either victimless or are somewhat minor offenses. Out of the 420,000 juveniles arrested in 2020, only around 30,000 of them were violent. Don't get me wrong, that is still a lot, but most of these arrests are for simple assault, like fighting, disorderly conduct, vandalism, liquor laws, and other drug abuse, and loitering. None of these are acceptable, and we still need to address it, but for most cases, these crimes can be chalked up to kids just being kids, usually in a bad environment that encourages this behavior. As I just alluded to, many of the juvenile crimes could be chalked up to kids who are in bad neighborhoods that inherently encourage delinquent behavior. Individuals, especially children, are a product of their environment. Wealth usually is the number one indicator of success, intelligence, delinquence, and crime. For good or for bad, wealth is the greatest discriminator. But why is wealth so important? Well, it's because wealth impacts so many other risk factors that you hear about: educational opportunities, career or work opportunities, access to nutrition and healthcare, exposure to crime, and parental involvement at home are all just a few of the risk factors that wealth impacts. All of these factors are massively important in predicting success or delinquency in crime, and they all are influenced themselves by wealth. The chart on the right shows this. Here's the chart a little bit bigger. It shows that the probability of delinquency drops drastically as family socioeconomic scores improve. There are systemic differences between neighborhoods at high risk and neighborhoods at low risk, but either way, the trend remains consistent regardless of neighborhood risk. The less wealthy an individual is, the more likely they are to commit crime. So how do we go about fixing these problems? Luckily, juvenile detention has been following a different trend than adult detention has. Crime in this country is a massive problem that we haven't even really put a dent in, but there are serious, promising results regarding decreasing juvenile crime. To address the solution, I'm going to split this into three categories. First, being hard-rooted, systemic societal issues. These issues are pretty easy to identify, which we've pretty much already done. The second category is prevention, stopping juvenile crime before it happens. And the last category is rehabilitation, which means that crime has already been committed, and now it's time to ensure that an individual doesn't commit the crime again and can be a productive member of society. Two of the best ways to break systemic injustice is to address income inequality and unequal access to education. In 2021, the median household income for white families was $30,000 more than black families and $20,000 more than Hispanic families. When you look at graduation rates by race and compare them to income by race, they follow the exact same order. Asians are highest in both, then whites, then Hispanics, then blacks. This isn't a coincidence. To close the income gap and provide equal access to education for all, families should be allowed to choose what schools they send their children to. As well, the government needs to invest into these high-risk communities and schools to increase their wealth and local opportunities. There are many ways to prevent juvenile delinquency, starting with what I just talked about. Ending systemic inequality and improving the quality of life for those in poverty is the first way to prevent crime. After that, though, the best way to prevent juvenile delinquency is through education and prevention programs and community involvement, especially when led by schools. Going more in depth on these prevention programs, it's important to note some things that make up good programs. Teaching behavior management, school competence, conflict resolution, and bullying prevention, as well as offering mentorship programs and interventions for troubled youth, go a long way in creating functional youth. Being competent socially and educationally helps prevent juvenile delinquency. Now look, it's impossible to prevent all crime, so we need to know what to do when it happens and how to rehabilitate juveniles instead of just focusing on the punishment. For this, I'm going to go back to a source that I've trusted throughout my project, and that is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, a branch of the United States Department of Justice. At the beginning of my project, I showed photos of juveniles in detention that emphasized how badly the conditions were inside their facilities. During that section, I said the following: locking children in a cage and pretending that the children themselves are the problems is the real injustice, and it is obvious that rehabilitation is not the goal in a place like that. The Department of Justice agrees, and one of their first priorities is to treat children as children. They point out that putting them in adult court and adult detention facilities increases the odds of them going back to prison in the future. The Department of Justice also acknowledges that with a criminal record, these juveniles have limited opportunities to succeed upon release and are likely to revert back to delinquent ways because of that. Therefore, another one of their priorities is to open up opportunities for them by educating them and preparing them to re-enter society. I'll finish where I began by stressing that these conditions are not acceptable for children. Children are children, and we must acknowledge that it is mostly society's fault that they are in these situations to begin with. These children are society's responsibility, and moving forward, we must take action in addressing the injustices done to them. All children make mistakes, and yes, theirs may be greater than most, but that does not mean that they deserve to be given up on. That doesn't mean that they deserve to be locked in a cell. Children are the future of the world, not just rich children or white children, but all children, and we can't ignore the ones that need our help the most. Thank you.